Hello, and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role playing games. My name is Andy Rao, and today I am joined by Matt.
Hi, everyone. I am filling in for Chris Salzman.
Indeed, Matt, you have been on the show a couple of times in the past, but not for a little while. And Chris, unfortunately, is under the weather, we'll say. And although he is making a recovery and you need not worry about him, he was not able to make this recording session. So, for our first episode of the new year, it will be me and Matt chatting here. I will say I appreciate that in Matt, I have a fellow lover of history, a history nerd. And so, Matt, I got to toss out a couple of questions to a couple of history related questions just to ground our conversation here.
Sounds great.
Here's the question I've been waiting to ask you, Matt. In college and grad school, uh,
Ah,
particularly grad school, interacting with different faculty and professors and researchers, I found that almost every historian I knew had a topic or an event or a time period that they considered to be the most important pivotal moment in human history. And I'm wondering if you have a pet topic that you feel is not sufficiently recognized as being the pivotal event that it is.
wow. That is a very open-ended question. I like it. The caveat that it has to not be universe or not super recognized for what it
Yes.
is
Yeah.
an interesting one. Yeah, what's yours? Give me an example of where you're thinking.
Yeah. So I've voiced this in the past, so apologies
Okay.
to obsessive listeners who may recall this, but I personally feel that the death of Julian the Apostate is a turning point that is insufficiently appreciated. I don't. I think it's one of my favorite what ifs in all of history because
That
I. Yeah.
that is a great one, Andy, for the simple reason that he was an effective emperor who was rolling back the
Yes.
Christianization of the Roman world in a very meaningful way at a
Yeah.
time where the old world could have still come back. That is
Exactly.
a tremendous example.
Yeah. What if he had? What if it had just his story had played out differently? Who knows?
Yeah,
But could be a very different world.
this might seem like overly similar, but the fun fact here is that Andy and I have very similar interests in the sort of late classical, early medieval world. But for me, I think it is the twin environmental shocks of Justinian's later reign.
Oh. Okay.
Um,
Can you give us the a quick rundown of
Yeah.
that?
So I think if people have heard about one of these titanic shocks, it is the first appearance of the Black Plague, Yersinia pestis,
Okay.
in the Mediterranean world, which reared its ugly head. Sort of, Justinian had embarked on this, many historians now feel, overly ambitious project to recreate the Roman Empire from its Byzantine descent, and was astonishingly successful at that until he was derailed. One of the events was this massive outbreak of bubonic plague that killed millions
Hmm.
across the Mediterranean world and took the knees right out of his sort of Byzantine resurgence. The other thing that happened during that era, and probably why the bubonic plague spread so profusely the way it did, is that was a there were two consecutive years of massive crop failures all across the Near East and Mediterranean world, and in some places they were referred to as years without sun.
Hmm.
There was some huge climatic event that took place, and I think the current thinking is that it was a volcano somewhere that erupted and just wiped out the agricultural economic base. And then, boom! Right as you start coming out of that, you get the plague. So it's sort of like these twin shocks hit right as his program of reconquest was at its most expansive and most stretched, and he could least afford to have anything go wrong. So I think a world that re-centralized under Roman rule for even a few hundred years is a much different world.
Wow, that's fascinating. It makes me think about the histories of these D&D and similar worlds. Histories of these fantasy worlds are often filled with cataclysms and stuff, but
Yeah.
I think there's something about the mundane is the wrong word, but the mundanity of like a plague or an unfortunate death or something like that having this huge effect on the future of the world. I think there's something interesting about that is lost, I guess, when you have these fantasy worlds with histories with giant meteors
Right.
devastating continents and the gods dying off or something like that, right?
Yeah, in fantasy settings, the catastrophes are personified in some way, right?
Yeah.
They're given form so that they can be overcome by a doughty band of adventurers or the one
Right.
true hero who learns how to step up. And you know, it's there's sort of this thing in like a lot of modern fantasy, right? Like a lot of people talked about the end of Game of Thrones, like, oh, it's a climate change metaphor, right? Like
Yeah.
because that's the catastrophe we that is present in our minds. So of course our fiction is going to include some sort of looming scenario like that. So yeah, I think fantasy for a long time, what are you going to do with a plague or 2 years without sun? That's a famine. What else could cause those things that
Yeah.
people could actually do something about?
From a world building perspective too, I wonder if it would be an interesting exercise to ask that what if question as you come up with the history of your own world, just to imagine different ways your world might evolve.
Yeah.
I think that might lead to some maybe slightly more grounded fantasy worlds. But anyway, as I say, this podcast is at least nominally about role playing games and not history. I will
Alas.
and the biggest event that has just happened is, of course, this is the first episode airing in the new year of our Lord 2023. So traditionally around this time, Chris and I would be talking, reflecting about the last year's worth of game mastering experience. Maybe try to tease out a couple of insights or lessons we've learned, and then talk about what we want to do in the new year. Let me just lob a general question out to you, Matt. What was the most memorable GMing experience you had in the last year?
Memorable GMing experiences. That's quite a good question. This past year, I've been doing sort of what I referred to as a year of experimentation, trying games that I haven't tried before, trying systems that do things that I have been interested in for a little while, but not necessarily gotten my toes dipped into yet. So yeah, I've been running a lot of little things, but I think the biggest revelation of the year for me is the carved from Brindlewood Bay mystery system.
Yeah, I had the good fortune of playing in a Brindlewood Bay game run by you. So
Yeah, I've been running this game for basically anyone who shows any interest at all. I leap forward and say I will run a Brindlewood Bay game for you because it has done two things for me. One is that I am very much a mystery slash investigative slash horror centric GM. All of my games in some way involves those elements to some degree. And the other thing that it does is it's the first powered by the apocalypse game that I got
hmm.
from reading it. And I was like, okay, I see now what powered by the apocalypse is attempting to accomplish, and I feel like I can do it now. I own Apocalypse World, I own Dungeon World, I own several other Apocalypse World games, but when I've read them, they have never struck me as something that like I don't know why, but they just never clicked with me.
Hmm.
I've stolen things from each of them to put into my other games. Don't get me wrong, but this is the first one I was like, okay, this as written, I can run this. This makes a lot of sense to me. I see what it's trying to do, and I see why it's doing it in this way.
If it's not too irritating to ask, could you say what that was that you had been missing before?
Yeah, I was talking to friend of this podcast, Kyle Latino, and John Corey a little bit about this, trying to articulate this. I'm not entirely sure yet. It might come down to the fact that, as I said, I'm all of my games are in some way investigative, and If you don't know Brindlewood Bay, it's sort of like Murder She Wrote that turns into this little cozy Cthulhu game. So there's lots of investigation. It's got some procedural murder mystery stuff, and then there's this conspiracy that's revealed in the shadows around it, and it's very much pitched as a TV show. And I think the fact that I understood the genre that it was trying to emulate and the material around it that the author Jason Cordova has put together for some reason articulated more clearly to me what a game should feel like and should look like, which allowed the mechanics that are present to really click with that. For whatever reason, the other Apocalypse or Powered by the Apocalypse games that I have read, just they haven't been able to articulate to me in a way that I understood what this what feelings this is trying to evoke. What even if I understood the genre, like I have
Mm.
a Powered by the Apocalypse cyberpunk game. I also love cyberpunk as a setting, but I didn't understand how the mechanics meshed with what I think of as cyberpunk. Whereas when I read Brindlewood Bay, I immediately saw how the mechanics of the Apocalypse engine would produce the desired genre effect at the table.
I am in a little bit of the same boat as you were in that I own a number of games. I've played a number of games with some sort of design connection to Apocalypse World. And yeah, I if it's not cliche to say it, it has yet to click for me in a fully satisfying way. Although I
Yeah.
have had fun with those games. But I'll have to give some thought to that reflecting back on my experience playing in the Brindlewood Bay game, which was it was a truly lovely experience. I really enjoyed it. Both,
Great.
the game itself was fantastic. You did a great job of GMing it. So I have to give sometimes, a particularly confident incarnation of incarnation of the rules is just what it takes to show you, okay, this is what they were going for the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it might be down to a simple matter of presentation
Yeah.
around it, or it might be down to me just having a level of comfortability and familiarity with it. Though, like I said, I've tried the cyberpunk ones, and I would think, given my background, that I would be comfortable with those as well. But I'm just not quite. I don't know.
I was going to say there are two things that stand out to me from the last year that were memorable GMing experiences. One of them, I think it was early in 2022. It's possible it was late. No, I'm pretty sure it was early this last year, but it
Nice.
was running a one shot for a bunch of high schoolers. So eight high schoolers. I was running
So many
Savage Worlds game.
players.
Yeah, and the what I drew from that experience, I probably invested more for that one 3 or so hour game. I probably invested more emotional energy and prep time than I would invest in, a full campaign for running
Wow.
grown ups or whatever. And it was just so outside my comfort zone. That's a lot of players. I didn't know any of them in advance. I hadn't run games for kids that age in a long time, and the last time I did, I made one of them cry. so, so, uh, and and it was also being run, kind of under the supervision of the educators at the school who were, there nominally to keep the game going, but also probably to keep an eye on like the weirdo parent, running
Right, right.
running
What are you teaching our children, Andy?
right, exactly. It was a lot of fun. It did not go perfectly,
Sure.
and I just emerged from it though feeling as if I had just had some of my skills just kind of stretched and challenged in a way that I normally associate with like non-gaming activities, I felt like I had to work for it, and that I walked away with it with a good new experience under my belt. So that was enjoyable. And then the second one I wanted to mention, it just happened a couple of days ago, so that's maybe why it figures so large in my mind right now. But over Christmas break, my wife ran a game of Call of Cthulhu set in the Regency period in England, using the new source book, Regency Cthulhu, published by Chaosium. And what was interesting about that, so I was playing in that game with my teenager, and my wife was GMing for the first time in many years, and she didn't know the rules, like at all.
Hmm.
And here's a little gaming heresy I have. The Call of Cthulhu system for decades it's always trotted out as a system that is allegedly simple and intuitive, but I defy anyone to read the combat chapter and tell me that is more intuitive and simpler than like a crunchy than Pathfinder, frankly. Like I didn't even try to teach, to quote, teach her the rules in advance, and I didn't even give her the Call of Cthulhu rule book.
Hmm.
It's like, well, if I hand my wife this 450-page tome, I mean, it's going to kill her desire to run this.
Yes.
So instead, just when a rule thing happened, my wife would just say, how do we do this?"
How do we
And
resolve this? Yeah.
and I would whip it up at the table, but I generally simplifying it a little bit because I didn't want to be in a situation where I had to teach people like a complicated system in the
Right.
middle of a game. Generally, we just needed to be able to resolve something,
Right.
and move
Coming
on.
down.
And
I was gonna say, yeah, yeah, really leaning into or forcing yourself to rely on the whole like rulings, not rules.
yeah, it meshed with some realizations I've had over the last couple of years running games like the Alien role playing game and Band of Blades that talk a lot about bringing the mechanics in when it will really add something to the experience to bring the mechanics in.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
on the player's end of that, it was just a lot more evident to me where the beats were in the story, where it was like, yes, it's time to bring in the element of chance to see
Yeah.
how this plays out. I've never been like a rules light snob or whatever, a snob about it. I
Uh-huh.
enjoy crunchy, hefty systems, but I know that going into the new year in the games I run, I have a slightly different idea about how to approach that when you pull out the dice and when you don't. So
That sounds amazing. I have two quick reactions to that. One is I think that the basic role playing BRP rules, which underlies Call of Cthulhu or is extracted from Call of Cthulhu, are quite simple in concept because it's just percentile dice.
yeah,
And then you get into pages and pages of modifiers. And
yes,
it's like, okay, we're wargaming now, boys, and boys and girls. Yeah, and the other thought is I, for years and years, have maintained that the best sessions, they just happen to be Cthulhu adjacent gaming because that's what I lean into cosmic horror, reality horror stuff. The best sessions that we've had are the ones where dice are not important
yeah,
more than once or twice.
yeah,
And as you say, then it's a matter of finding when the story needs the tension of an uncertain outcome.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, I certainly think that you can get quite far in role playing without dice if you're focusing on telling a story rather than clearing a dungeon. I guess if you're gonna
It's
do clearing a dungeon as role playing, absolutely no judgment from me. You need dice. There's gonna be a lot of situations where you need mechanics and you need dice stuff.
So, okay. So, having reflected on the last year, I guess the natural question is what are your plans for this year when it comes to GMing? Why don't we start with a topic that's been circling around the game community a lot the last couple of weeks? And there is this kind of challenge or resolution or whatever you want to call it going around called Dungeon 23, I think,
Hmm.
where an awful lot of people that I follow on social media are drawing a dungeon room a day or some variant on that. You are not like a D&D GM or primarily. Is that a thing that appeals to you? Is there something in there that you have chosen to adapt to like your own GMing goals?
Gotcha. Absolutely. I really love the idea, and I think that it is awesome that so many people are going to just spend a little time every day engaging in something that hopefully will be cathartic and cozy and creative, and get them thinking about interesting things that might happen in a dungeon because I think after a couple of weeks of designing rooms, you're almost guaranteed to have run out of generic things that might be
Yeah,
happening in a
yes.
dungeon.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of a challenge is great.
I want to see everybody's daily dungeon rooms in like 8 weeks,
Right.
because we'll, as you say, we'll have gone through all of the stuff that springs to mind quickly, and
Yeah.
it will be getting real weird or real bad or something. But
Yeah.
either way, it'll be more interesting in a
Yeah.
couple months.
My hope and wish for people is that a couple of months from now they're off in some sort of David Lynchian
Yes.
realm, building the strangest dungeons that anyone has ever seen. And I'm sure that there's a finite quantity of time that people will actually spend on this. I'll be
Yeah, yeah.
very impressed by anyone who makes it the entire year for sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
That's awesome. But I at least am spending my little bit of gaming time every day, my little bit of cozy creative gaming time every day, gradually prepping for my next bigger campaign cycle that I want to run. And this
Okay.
sort of the year of experimentation was around trying to explore different mechanics, different rule systems, different styles of playing games, because I knew that I wanted to run this campaign eventually, and I wanted to explore what mechanics I might want to use for that. So I think I've settled on stuff now. So I am basically using Dungeon 23 as an opportunity to, it's like prep 23, if you will.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Keep myself
Yeah.
responsible for that. And it's actually, I think you yourself are running at least a version of the old Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay classic, The Enemy Within. Is
Yes.
that correct? Is that still an ongoing concern?
It is still an ongoing concern, but I am probably shifting that to something else this year.
Okay,
Just hasn't been taking root, I don't think.
gotcha.
It's a game played with my family members. There was a lot of excitement about when my wife ran that Cthulhu game. It really clicked.
Hmm.
So that feels like the right place to move my family game.
Nice.
When you get a teenager's attention, you don't want to squander it, I guess.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And yeah, it's a good. That's a good reminder that ultimately it's about having a good time at the table with your friends,
yeah,
and in your case,
absolutely.
your family as well. So got to read the room there. Well, yeah, the game that I am prepping is also a take on the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay classic, The
Hey,
Enemy
awesome.
Within.
Are you planning to run it mostly straight, or are you taking it as a launching point for your own
Hmm.
stuff?
I would say I would I would smile mischievously and say that I'm planning on playing it about as straight as I played Master of Nyarlathotep and Eternal Eyes, which
Okay,
is
that's
to say,
great.
it will be, I hope, recognizable as
Yeah.
that the core story spine.
Well, I know from my own reading up on this over the last few months, there's some really good accounts and resources for running Enemy Within out
Mhm.
there. There's one or two bloggers in particular that are just very prolific on their experience running it and their,
Yeah.
critiques and suggestions for working with it. So,
I have a bunch of stuff printed out from them over on that
oh, do
table,
you?
or at
Okay.
least one or two of them printed out over on the table over there. So
Those of you who know Matt know that Chris and I have been prodding him for a while. It's one of our longer term goals to get Matt to start up some sort of blog about history or gaming or something like that. I would love to see some sort of. I
yes.
would love to hear as it plays out how the Enemy Within is going for you. I guess I suspect you have a lot of good things, cool, useful things to say about the experience.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
I have nearly 3,000 words of a review of the Cubicle 7 edition of the product open on my
that's
computer that I owe you at some point,
that's right.
and
Yes,
we will get there
that's fantastic.
if you're up for something of that length. And yeah, I've been trying to post, and this year I also plan on finally getting a blog, so I will post these things publicly when I can. But I've also, as part of Dungeon 23, at least been posting my updates, and I will post finished preparatory material when it arrives.
Okay.
So I'm
Yeah.
done with the character sheet now, and that may seem like a weird place to start, but I have my reasons,
Oh no,
and
not at all.
I will post the rules system that I'm using next. I think.
Yeah. Is it set in that Warhammer world more or less as presented, by Cubicle 7?
Kind of. I want it to feel a little more real because I really do believe in the premise start with Earth
Hmm.
that Robin Laws and Kenneth Haidt talk about a lot. So I'm going to run a, a bit of it through a sort of earthy or seventh CE sort of lens. The Warhammer fantasy world is very much a like Tolkien plus, right? It
Yeah.
because of the sort of intellectual property that it is and supports and how long it's been there, and they have all these other games and product lines and tie-ins, that it has to be like an omni fantasy experience from their corporate perspective. Whereas I want to kind of try and tone some of that down a little bit to
Yeah.
focus in on some of the themes that are important to me, or that make the story interesting to me.
You mentioned drawing inspiration from two sources that are quite different in tone. You have the Warhammer universe, which the fantasy universe, which generally speaking, PCs are nobodies. It's a grimy,
Mm-hmm.
trudging around in the muck, fighting giant rats sort of world.
Trying desperately not to die while fighting
Right.
a rat.
Exactly. And
Yes.
that you mentioned Seventh Sea, which is my understanding of Seventh Sea is it's much more, I guess, empowered and swashbuckly feel. I'm
Yes.
curious, are you taking the enemy within in a more swashbuckly direction, or are you drawing other things from the system?
I'm hoping to take it in more of a sword and sorcery direction.
Okay.
So yes, the player characters will be more powerful than your run of the mill first level Warhammer fantasy roleplay characters,
Yeah.
but also sword and sorcery characters are a little more fiasco esque, I
Sure.
suppose, than your swashbuckling hero of Seventh Sea. So I want to try and meet maybe closer to Seventh Sea than the gritter scene
Yeah.
stuff, but. So I think the sword and sorcery tone is um, really what I'm striving for there. Heroes who are prone to poor impulse control and bad decision making under pressure,
Yeah.
and we'll see if I can pull that off. But that's certainly the mechanical focus for me.
One of the things I bumped into early on in prepping for Enemy Within is you really need to have players that are going to look for ways to get themselves into trouble. At least that
Yeah.
that's the way to maximize the fun is you have people whose instinct will be, yes,
Yes.
I'm I'm gonna try and steal that, or I am gonna, try such and such a poorly advised but fun idea. So
Yeah.
the more cautious, and maybe this is a general rule of fantasy role playing in general, the more cautious and careful players are, the less fun they get up to. But uh,
Yeah.
last question, I have you, knowing your interests, have you considered Swords of the Serpentine as a rule system?
Yes, that ultimately is going to be the core of
Okay.
the rules.
Right.
That system does a lot of stuff that's distinct for the game, for its setting. So some of it needs to be changed,
Yeah.
and I've changed some of that. But one thing that instantly appealed to me about it was that game's handling of sorcery, where sorcery was this sort of extremely powerful but fell and uncontrollable and corrupting influence on the world. And I immediately thought to myself, gee, that sounds a lot like the ruinous powers in the Warhammer
Mm.
Old World. Um,
Yeah.
I bet that these two things would play really well together, just with some slight reskinning
Yeah.
around things, and I think they do. I'm quite excited about that, and I'm also excited about that the way that system takes the careful, cautious, precise investigativeness from a Trail of Cthulhu sort of environment, and gives the players lots of ways to just spend points to cause big,
Yeah.
cool, perhaps inadvisable things to happen.
Yes. Well, I wish you the best of luck in prepping for that, and I hope that we'll get some periodic reports or updates.
I will try my best.
As for my 2023
Yeah,
GMing
what I'm
plans.
up
I've
to.
been trying to keep it more realistic. I guess I'm prone to getting excited about really epic project ideas that are too ambitious for me to actually pull off. So
Hmm.
if I had a regular Call of Cthulhu game running for at least the next couple of months with my wife and teenager, I'd be super happy about that. And I had a really fun time running the Alien RPG. It was just a 3 session, not a one shot, but a mini campaign.
Nice.
And I got good vibes from the players there. So I have pitched something else of kind of a similarly limited scope. So something we could play and know that after, I don't know, a month or 2 months, we would have reached some sort of a satisfying end point to the story.
Nice.
So I think if I could get something like that done in like maybe the first quarter of 2023, I would be feeling pretty happy. And yeah, so I guess we'll see. I pitched a number of games. Haven't heard back if there's a clear preference. I
Gotcha.
have one or two I'm maybe most itching to run. I would love to run a lot of things, but I would love to get some Fate of Cthulhu in,
Okay.
just because I have had bad luck in getting that to the table, and I really want to take it for a
Gotcha.
spin. But yeah,
I
we'll
just
see.
gave my Fate of Cthulhu core book to Chris Salzman.
Okay.
So
Just the other day, a number of kind of former guests, people in the Roll for Topic community, we had a video chat just to hang out for a bit, and it came up that Fate is one of those systems that is in our little community is very widely admired and is on paper what many of us everything that many of us want out of a game,
mhm.
but there's not a lot of successful Fate games that have been run in our community. So
Yeah.
there's some kind of a disconnect, and I don't think the fault is with Fate itself. I don't, and these are
Probably not.
experienced GMs, so I don't really think the fault is there. But there is just I hear that about Fate more than I do about other systems. Maybe it's something like that Apocalypse World experience you were describing, where
Yeah.
something needs to come along that makes it click for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I first found out about Fate. There's a game that uses it called Spirit of the Century,
Yeah, I've heard of it.
which is sort of pulp role playing.
Yeah.
And when I was getting back into role playing games and prepping Masks of Nyarlathotep, which was the first thing I did after college, I actually thought about using Spirit of the Century
Oh,
because I knew I wanted a pulp feel to it.
yeah.
And I only later found Trail of Cthulhu.
Okay.
So, yeah, again, it was one of those things where I was looking at the two systems side by side, and I was like, and I got what Gumshoe was trying to do
Yeah.
on a more
Absolutely.
intuitive level, and for whatever reason, as it sounds like this is not uncommon, I have failed to revisit Fate.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've been chatting on for a while now, so I think it's time to wrap up. But I want
Sure,
to say first, just wish you the best 2023 in
thanks,
your GMing. I hope that the Enemy Within takes off and is a wild success for you.
thanks.
And I want to thank you for stepping up to be sort of co-host slash guest here in Chris's absence, not his absinthe. Yeah.
in the absence of Chris
That's
Salzman.
right. And so, with that, I think I'm going to wrap us up and wish
Okay,
all of our beloved listeners a wonderful new year and happy GMing over the next 12 months. So,
nice.
this has been Roll for Topic. We're part of the Roll for It podcasting network, which includes our sister podcast, The Splat Book. The Splat Book is hosted by the aforementioned Kyle Latino and John Corey, two wonderful, lovely people that have been on our show here more than once. And you should definitely go check them out at thesplatbook.com, I believe. And with that, I have been Andy Rao.
And I've been Matt Wilson.
And remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.